Good evening, Utah, and hello from our nation's capital. Welcome to Senator Lee's Tele-Townhall. If you're joining us tonight and would like to ask Senator Lee a question, go ahead and press *3. And if you're online, remember to use the hashtag #LeeTownhall. Senator, you've been hosting these Tele-Townhalls nearly every month for the past 5 years. And usually we invite Utahns from across the state to participate, which will often bring thousands of people to have a dialogue together. But at the beginning of this year, you decided to take a different approach and tailor these town hall forum events to smaller regions within the state of Utah. For example, tonight, by the end of tonight, after talking with residents from Morgan, Weber, Summit, and Wasatch counties, you will have hosted a Tele-Town Hall in each of the 29 counties back in the state. So while we wait for more people to join the call, why don't you start by telling us about why you decided to tailor these forums to smaller regions within the state?
Sure. Thanks to all of you for joining us, and Linda, thanks for hosting. Yeah, we have been doing these for about 5 years, these Tele-Town Halls. I decided this year that I wanted to tailor-make some of these town hall experiences so that we could talk to people on a more local level. You know, the concerns that might affect a rancher in Morgan County or Weber County might be different from the concerns faced by a single parent in Salt Lake County. In each part of our state, we see unique interests, and we see that the way people interact with the federal government might differ from one part of the state to the other. And so that's why I like to try to have these more localized Tele-Town Halls so that I can hear what's on your mind. I can hear about the things that are concerning you, that are uniquely affecting you in your part of the state. So I look forward to tonight hearing questions and concerns from people in Weber County and in Morgan County. And thanks for joining us.
All right, and just a reminder, if you're on the phone tonight and would like to ask Senator Lee a question, go ahead and press *3. And if you're online, use the hashtag #LeeTownhall. Our first question tonight is from Weber County Commissioner Matt Bell, who is actually here in Washington with us and joined us on the call tonight. We're going to go to him first. Commissioner Bell, you're on the line with Senator Lee.
Hello, Commissioner.
Well, Senator, thank you for having me. As the federal government and local government, as we're reducing crimes, reducing some felonies to misdemeanors, we're getting more people back on the streets. There's people that might be coming to jails versus going through the federal system. My question is how are we going to pay to rehabilitate these people for programming and counseling, and to once again to get them to be productive citizens paying taxes?
Okay, Commissioner Bell, thank you for your question. You know, you've got a lot of background, a lot of experience in this area. I think you know more than most people. You know more certainly than I do, or most members of Congress, and so it's great to have your insight on this. But you know, my own perspective on it is that we've got to start where we are rather than where we wish we were, and it's one of the reasons why I've introduced the Sentencing Reform and Corrections Act in the Senate, which passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee by an overwhelming bipartisan supermajority vote of 15-5 just a few months ago. We hope to get that to the floor. Within the federal system, what this would do is, number one, make a number of changes to our federal sentencing laws, making our minimum mandatory sentencing laws more reasonable in areas where we have outpaced any semblance of reasonableness and any comparison to corresponding state law offenses. We'll make some modest but necessary changes to our sentencing laws. That's Title I of the bill. Title II of the bill prepares people to be reintroduced into their communities, and I think this is part of what you're talking about. It provides programming for federal prisoners, identifying ways in which they can earn good time behavior. They can work time off their sentence based on their willingness and ability to go through certain training programs to make sure that they're ready to reintegrate into their communities. This is an important part of what we do because, as you know, if we can reduce the rate of recidivism, the rate at which someone recommits an offense after they get out, we can actually make our entire system, our entire criminal justice system, more effective, more efficient, and we can create a system in which we have less crime overall if we properly reintroduce people into their communities. And so this bill is a good example of how we can be at once tough on crime and also smart on crime. Those two things don't have to be at odds with each other. Within the federal system, we're able to pay for this within existing funding streams, and I look forward to getting this legislation passed.
All right, and just a reminder, if you're on the phones this evening and would like to ask Senator Lee a question, go ahead and press *3, and if you're online, please use the hashtag #LeeTownhall. We're going to go to Morgan County next, where Kira has a question about the legalization of marijuana. Kira, you're on the line with Senator Lee.
Hello, Kira.
Thank you. Senator Lee, hello.
Hello.
Thank you for your time.
You bet.
Senator Lee, as you know, most polls show that the majority of Utah citizens now support medical marijuana. As a supporter of the 10th Amendment, would you support legislation of marijuana at the federal level to allow the states to make their own decisions regarding the use of marijuana?
Okay, great question. Kira, first of all, I just found out that the Utah State Senate just passed SCR 11 today on second reading, which calls upon Congress to reschedule medical marijuana from a Class 1 to a Class 2, and also calls for additional research at institutions including the University of Utah. So that's an interesting one to follow. I'm sympathetic to the issue that you raised because of the fact that I'm a strong believer in federalism, strong believer in the constitutional structural protection that exists in saying that most decisions are to be made at the state and the local level and not at the federal level. It's one of the reasons why I have co-sponsored with my friend Cory Gardner. Cory Gardner is one of the senators from our neighboring state, Colorado, and I've co-sponsored with him the Therapeutic Hemp Medical Access Act, which would exclude cannabidiol that has less than 0.3% of THC from the federal definition of marijuana in the Controlled Substances Act, and would therefore take that out of Schedule 1. So I'm sympathetic to it on that level. I would also tell you, Kira, that as a matter of first principles, I have always thought that a state ought to have the discretion to make decisions with regard to a particular type of treatment, particularly when you're talking about a preparation that can be produced, manufactured, and distributed entirely within one state. You know, it's a different thing if we're talking about something that has to be manufactured and distributed in interstate commerce. But whereas here we're talking about something that could be produced entirely within one state, as a matter of first principles, it would make sense to allow a state to make that decision on its own. That is not, of course, what federal law currently does, and federal law in that respect has been upheld by the Supreme Court in a case called Gonzalez versus Raich, which was decided about 12 years ago. I still think that, again, as a matter of first principles, the state ought to have the discretion to make that decision on its own, as long as it's something that can be produced, distributed, and consumed entirely within one state. I'm not aware, Kira, of any proposal right now that's gaining traction in Congress that would reschedule this and formally allow states to make that decision. I suspect that as to the extent that Utah continues with its measure with Senate Concurrent Resolution 11, especially if that's passed also by the House of Representatives, if Utah and other states continue to call upon Congress to look at this, I suspect that might change and that Congress might have a look at it. I want to make sure I understand the science behind it, and that you know, before I vote on anything, I want to make sure that there are not other things I haven't considered. But again, as a matter of first principles, I'm very sympathetic to the argument that states ought to have discretion when it comes to something that can be produced and distributed and consumed entirely within one state.
Okay, we still have several of you joining the call. If you would like to ask a question this evening, go ahead and press *3. And if you're online, remember to use the hashtag #LeeTownhall. We're going to go to Eden next, where Gary has a question about the nuclear option. Gary, you're on the line with Senator Lee.
Hello, Gary.
Hello, Representative Lee.
Hi.
First of all, I want to play by the same rules the Democrats did. If they use a nuclear option, 50% plus one, to pass bills they want to pass, why won't you, the Republicans, do the same thing, play by the same rules?
Okay, great question, Gary. So you're referring to the nuclear option which was deployed by the Democrats in November of 2013.
Yes.
It's important to remember, Gary, that the Democrats did that not in connection with the legislative calendar of the Senate, but with the executive calendar of the Senate. Let me explain what I mean by that. They deployed the nuclear option to modify the effect of Rule 22 of the Senate, which requires a supermajority 60-vote threshold on what's called a cloture vote. The cloture vote in the Senate is what occurs when you bring debate to a close. You typically have to get to a cloture vote to bring debate to a close before you can pass most legislation. The Democrats deployed that not with respect to legislation, but with respect to presidential nominations. And so they went nuclear on that front and not on the legislative front. I've long maintained that it's wrong to break the rules of the Senate in order to change the rules of the Senate. I think they should have gone through the normal process. There is very little likelihood of any nuclear option going on right now because you've got a divided Senate and White House relationship, meaning the Senate is under the control of the Republican Party and the White House is under the control of the Democratic Party. Under those circumstances, I wouldn't expect to see anyone undertaking the nuclear option. I suspect that there could be some talk of it if the Democrats get control of the Senate and retain control of the White House after the next election, or if Republicans retain control of the Senate and the White House at the same time. There could be more talk of that. There is no talk of that right now because of where we are. But in any event, I don't see that moving onto the legislative calendar. I see that as being something that will remain limited to the executive calendar.
Okay, and for those of you still joining the call, if you're on the phone and would like to ask a question to Senator Lee tonight, go ahead and press *3, and if you're online, use the hashtag #LeeTownHall. Our next question, we're going to go to Joanne, and she has a question about medical insurance expenses. Joanne, you're on the line with Senator Lee.
Hello, Joanne.
Hi, Senator Lee. Thank you for being there for my question. I'm 60 years old. I have worked since I was 15, and retirement is just out of the question because I, as a middle-class American, cannot afford health insurance, which would be $1,000 a month premium for a $3,000 deductible. I know this is between state and federal concerns, but I've come from immigrant grandparents and lived the American dream and worked hard all my life to see no end in sight. I'm just really concerned about Americans' quality of life. I am a healthcare worker. I've been a nurse since I graduated from high school, went straight to nursing school, and we ranked number 27 on our quality of health care, but yet remain number 1 in health care costs. Can you just help me understand where this is going in the future, and will I see it in my lifetime as a result? I just would like to beg America and insurance companies for affordable health care. I want nothing for free, but I don't consider $1,000 a month for $3,000 a month deductible affordable for the average American.
No, you're exactly right. And Joanne, first of all, thank you. Thanks for your service as a nurse. Nurses do an awful lot of work and very often don't get enough praise. And so thank you for your service as a nurse and for your question. You bring a unique perspective to this as someone who has spent her career in the healthcare profession. But look, you're exactly right. Health insurance costs have gone up significantly in the last few years. And the circumstances you describe are both tragic and unfortunately very, very common, just so common throughout our state and across America. The Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act was passed into law about 6 years ago. And the promise was that it would make health care more affordable and more accessible for the American people. And you know, at the time it was passed, members of Congress were told they had to pass it to find out what was in it. At no point since it has been passed has this law enjoyed the support of the American people. It has always been the case since the moment it was passed that a majority of the American people have not supported it, and with good reason, because it has made healthcare less affordable and less accessible. And you're right, it doesn't make sense to pay out $1,000 a month for the type of policy that you're describing, especially with the really high deductible that you describe. And it's forcing a lot of people to make decisions regarding their employment, their retirement, that they would never otherwise make. And so the short answer to your question is I think it will change. I think it's going to change. A lot of how it changes and the timing of the change will be dependent on what happens in this November's election. I know that if this election turns out the way that I would hope it would, we would repeal the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2010, and we would replace it. We would replace it with a series of free market reforms that I hope and expect would put in place a system that is more responsive to free market forces than our pre-Obamacare status quo was. The reason I believe so strongly in the free market here is that anytime we allow the free market to operate, when you allow more competitors to compete to provide you with health care or with health insurance, the price tends to go down and quality tends to go up. And so, you know, and you're right to point out that if we're number one in terms of what we spend on health care, we ought to be number one in terms of the quality of the care. It's concerning when we're number one in terms of what we're paying, but number 27 in terms of what we're getting. We hope to close that, and I believe with the right president elected in 2016, we can bring about the change that we need. There are a number of good proposals out there being developed to replace Obamacare, and that would allow you as a consumer to select competitive bids from different insurers, put you back in charge of making your own healthcare decisions. This needs to be the touchstone of what we do to replace Obamacare. We need to be looking for options that will put patients and their doctors back in charge of healthcare decisions rather than having those decisions made by government bureaucrats in Washington. I believe that something can and will happen on that following this November's election. I wish I could tell you we could get it done before then, but that is mathematically impossible at the moment, and that's one of the reasons why this election is so important.
Okay, and if you're on the phone tonight and would like to ask Senator Lee a question, go ahead and press *3, and if you're online, use the hashtag #LeeTownhall. Next, we have a question from County Councilman Logan Wild from Morgan County, who is unable to join the call, but his question is, with the reintegration of wild sheep on public lands, how can your office help mitigate the effects producers face with the inevitable conflicts?
Okay. I'm grateful for this question from County Councilman Logan Wild. And you know, the first and most important fact I want to emphasize here is that wildlife management falls under the jurisdiction of state government and not of the federal government. We need to do everything we can, and I'm doing everything I can as your senator to make that happen. Through my correspondence with the U.S. Department of the Interior, Secretary Jewell has received a number of communications from me and my office and my colleagues about this, and about the fact that we need to make sure that local control is retained to the maximum extent possible, and also that we need to make sure that we protect the rights of all the stakeholders here. You know, my staff and I have pursued a number of solutions to make sure that both hunting rights and grazing rights are protected. The Public Lands Initiative that I'm proud to be a part of, along with Congressman Rob Bishop, has some provisions that identify places where various sheep and bighorn ram ranges will be. And a number of my state staff members have acted as mediators in this situation, sitting down with all the relevant stakeholders to try to figure out solutions that protect grazing allotments from encroachment by bighorn ram populations, while mitigating diseases where integration has occurred between bighorn rams and domesticated sheep. And a few stakeholders that my staff has worked with include state veterinarians, the Utah's Department of Agriculture, the Wool Growers Association, the U.S. Forest Service, Division of Wildlife Resources, the Farm Bureau, sheep grazers, and the counties. So please know that we're looking at this issue. We take it very seriously, and we're doing everything we can to compete all the relevant interests here, to protect all the competing interests.
All right, next we're going to go to Cassidy over in Ogden, a senior from Ben Lomond High School, and she has a question about a statement you made. Cassidy, you're on the line with Senator Lee.
Okay, great.
Hello, Cassidy.
In the 4 months since you made this statement, Utah has a proud tradition of being a national leader when it comes to taking in refugees from around the world. But there are just too many open security questions at this time when it comes to Syrian refugees. Has any evidence surfaced concerning open security questions towards Syrian refugees and undercover ISIS members? And how has this decision impacted Utah's proud tradition when taking in refugees from around the world?
Okay, well, first of all, the ongoing threats that we face by ISIS and by others around the world who hate us, who hate our way of life, are themselves indications of the threats that we face. Now, if the question is whether any refugee admitted since then has undertaken a violent act while here as a refugee, I can't point to any right now in the last 4 months, if that's the nature of your question. And so if that's the question, the answer to that narrow question is no. That, of course, doesn't mean that there is no threat, nor does it mean that we don't need to be cautious when accepting people into this country from other parts of the world, whether under refugee status or whether under some other type of immigration status. We need to be vigilant. We need to make sure that those who come into the country are people that we have vetted adequately and that we know who they are, we know why they want to come into this country, and we need to have verified that their backgrounds will make them compatible with living in the United States. I think one of our first duties as federal officers, as federal officials, is to make sure that we protect the homeland, that we protect the American people from those who would harm the American people. And I think this is part of that effort.
Okay, our final question tonight is going to come from Ed. He has a question about workers and insurance. Ed, you're on the line with Senator Lee.
Hello, Ed. Ed, are you there? Linda, I think we might have lost Ed.
I think we may have lost him.
Hello?
Oh, there's Ed. How are you, sir?
Good, just fine. The question I have that I bring up, it's quite concerning. It's brought up to me by a young lady who's working at Weaver County, who's working for, she's been out there about 20 years, and trying to get on full time. They keep denying her. Now, things like the insurance part, like you've been talking about insurance with other people. Well, this particular problem, she's very, very concerned because they knocked their hours down to 32. Now they're thinking about talking it down to 19 hours a week, and so they don't have to pay insurance. Well, the more they keep knocking down hours on people that's been there 18 to 20 years, so they don't have to pay insurance, then we're just starting the whole thing over again. Yeah, it's hard enough for people that they're not getting insurance to get it on their own, and they cut down hours so that Weaver County won't have to pay insurance. Weaver County, all the rest of the facilities, they should be trying their hardest to help people get insurance. I've seen many, many, many people, for example, even me, I got worked for 38 years at the same company. doctors wouldn't let me go back to work anymore because I was on a medical disability, and I didn't want to have that. I didn't choose to do this. And then to watch this young lady, what she's going through, and want to cut their hours even more. I'd like to know what we can do to help stop this, so there's people don't have, oh, now we're going to cut your hours even more, so we don't want to have to pay any insurance for you. I thought the problem is to help people get insurance.
Yes, Ed, this is again one of the tragic side effects of excessive federal intrusion into matters that really shouldn't be subject to federal intrusion. When the federal government steps in, ostensibly in the interest of helping people, it often ends up hurting the very people who are most in need of protection. And this is both ironic and very unfortunate. But I hear stories like this all across the great state of Utah. And I know that we as Utahns are not alone in this. This is happening to people all over the country. The very same people who we ought to be most concerned about very often get hurt. They have their hours reduced because their employer doesn't want to be subject to whatever federal regulation is at issue, whether it's under Obamacare or some other provision of federal law or a federal regulation. I think this is unfortunate, and it's yet another reason why I think we need to repeal Obamacare in its entirety and start from scratch. Because these regulations are not only costly to the economy as a whole, but they're hurting America's poor and middle class. They're making it harder for those who are at the bottom of the economic ladder in our country to make their way up. And they're blocking those who are making progress on that ladder from climbing as high as they would like to into and through the middle class. And this is tragic. It's one of the reasons why I remain committed to the full repeal and replacement of Obamacare. But thank you for sharing that story with me, and it's one of many data points that I will stock away as I proceed with figuring out how to repeal and replace Obamacare.
Okay, we want to thank everyone that was able to join us, whether by phone or online. As we close tonight, Senator, I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you to talk a little bit about constituent services and what people in Morgan and Weber counties can do to stay connected to you and follow what you're doing.
Thanks again to all of you for joining us this evening. Thanks to those of you who have called in with questions. And for those of you who may not have gotten to ask questions, feel free to reach out to us. Anytime we can be of help. If you're experiencing an issue with any federal agency or any aspect of the federal government, please reach out to me in my office because we might be able to be of help to you. You can reach us at 801-524-5933. That's my state office. And you can reach my Northern Utah director, Ryan Wilcox. Ryan is from Weber County himself and is a former member of the state legislature. He's very in touch with the needs of Northern Utahns and is eager to help. I've got staff members who have expertise in interacting with different aspects of the federal government. So whether you're having a problem with the Social Security Administration, the Veterans Affairs Administration, or any other entity within the federal government, please call us, again at 801-524-5933. We might be able to help. We've had a lot of experience interacting with a lot of government offices. Our job is to make sure that we help you interact with the government. I believe strongly in what Abraham Lincoln said about the purpose of government in his 1861 address to Congress, in which he said the purpose of government is to elevate the human condition, to lift artificial weights from all shoulders, to clear the paths of laudable pursuit for all, to afford all an unfettered start and a fair chance at the race of life. Sometimes those obstacles, those artificial weights, are placed on the shoulders of Americans by the government itself, and especially where that's the case, we want to be there to lift them, to clear them out of your way, so that you can do what you do best, so that you can take care of your family and you can go about your life without undue interference from the federal government. We live in a time of great challenge and of great conflict, but I believe our best days remain ahead of us because we as a people remain committed to the principle of liberty and committed to principles of limited government as embodied in our Constitution. So I thank all of you for joining us tonight. May God bless the sovereign state of Utah, and may God bless the United States of America.